Hi, this is S Monty Gaming, and today we're going to talk about Succession. If you've started a new game of Crusader Kings 3 recently, you've more than likely experienced the wonderful world of Partition Succession laws, and more than likely have been frustrated as you've watched your realm fracture upon your death. Fear not, I will show you some tips and tricks to mitigate these succession's outcomes. In this video, we'll first briefly discuss the mechanics of partition and how to go about switching to a more favorable law. Then we will cover how to prepare for the inevitable succession, and I'll present some possible methods of consolidating titles once you've passed. Let's take a look at the two succession laws you'll likely face in the game's current start dates: Confederate Partition and Partition. Both of these pass your ruler's main titles onto your primary heir, and subsequently the remaining titles are divided amongst your eligible heirs. This can cause a realm to split, as your other heirs may inherit a title that is equal to yours, and thus forcing them to become independent. The other annoying thing about Confederate Partition is that it allows heirs to create titles when possible. Let's consider a ruler that had managed to create the Duke title in hopes that their sons will become vassals to the primary heir upon succession. Well, in Confederate Partition, if one of those sons receives at least 51% of counties within another de jure duchy, that title will then be created, and thus this heir will become their own independent duke. This is why if you've started a game in 867 AD, your goal should be to work towards switching to Partition as quickly as possible, as Confederate will make your expansion plans much more difficult to achieve. Make sure that when you're playing, you remember you can always find a title's line of succession by hovering over its icon in the menu. As you can see, the pop-up also includes subsequent heirs should anything happen to your primary heir before your passing. You'll want to check this on all of your held titles to see exactly what your realm looks like on succession. As I just mentioned, when starting as Confederate Partition, you'll want to change to Partition as soon as possible. You can find the succession laws under the Realm tab in Succession. When hovering over your desired succession law, the tooltip should show you any prerequisites that need to be met before changing. Changing to Partition will require limited crown authority and the hereditary rule innovation. Given hereditary rule is an innovation that doesn't become available until 900 AD, you'll probably already have access to limited crown by then. In any case, it's always worth watching the culture tab as you get closer and keep an eye on all the progress. Innovations are discovered slowly over time, and your culture's cultural head may be able to speed up the discovery of a certain innovation by electing their specific fascination. The cultural head is the ruler with the most counties within their realm of the same culture, so just be aware if you're looking for a bit more control on the progression of innovations. That being said, you're most likely stuck with Partition for quite a while. But there are ways of easing this pain, and I will present a few tips that will help you manage and keep your sanity during these times. Quickly before we move on, I just wanted to mention that if you feel this content is helpful or useful in any way, and you want to see more mechanic-specific guides and builds, feel free to drop a like or a sub. You know the deal, it helps grow the channel, but also lets me know that these things are useful in some way. And now for the fun stuff. The best way to manage this type of succession is via proper planning. The following 10 tips should help you in your future games, and in no particular order. Number 1, if possible, create a higher title for yourself. Let's say you are a growing count. Your goal should be creating that Duke title before your passing. That way, if your counties get split up, they still remain your vassals. This leads to the next tip. Don't try to expand late in your life. Claims and war cost money and resources. If pressing a particular claim will ultimately pass to your primary heir's sibling, and thus outside your future realm, the right play might be to wait until your heir is in power before expanding. Maximize inheritance. Make sure you set your heir up for success. If they're ultimately going to be doing the expansion, try to keep your gold reserves up so they can make claims or hire mercenaries if needed. Prepare for future expansion as well. Maybe you're a bit more of a schemer than your child. Go ahead and break up some key targets' alliances to make things easier. If you're clever enough and have the Know Thyself perk, you can also time your counselor's Fabricate Scheme task to complete just as your heir takes over, so they have a fresh new claim to press. Always watch your title's succession lines, as you'll want to have an idea of who gets what upon your death. Given things may split up unfavorably, you may be interested in disinheriting certain heirs, though this costs your dynasty precious renown, which may be difficult to come by. Otherwise, you can attempt to kill your heirs if you have the sadistic trait, but forcing them into battle as a knight could be a more subtle way of accomplishing this. Be sure to watch other rulers' titles' lines of succession. When planning your expansion, check to see how a target's titles may split, as a convenient murder on, let's say, your liege, may split up his titles, giving you individually weak targets to choose from. You can also grant titles to an older person in the realm, as these characters may never produce any children. Thus, you, and subsequently your primary heir, may receive this title back upon their passing. Another neat little trick is to pick up the Restraint perk from the learning tree, as this will allow you to use the decision Embrace Celibacy, which will naturally stop you from having children. Destroying titles may also be an option, especially if you're not in Confederate Partition. Let's say you hold 2 kingdoms and risk splitting into 2 independent realms. It might be worth destroying that second kingdom title to avoid losing a bunch of vassals. And the last tip, centralize your levies. Make sure you construct military buildings in your capital's county's holdings, as these succession law types will generally grant at least this title to your primary heir. Thus, when your new heir takes over, they will have as much military power as available when it's time to consolidate. Succession is always a given. With proper preparation, your reconsolidation of land your father once had should be less painful. Here's some quick examples of how to get the titles back into your realm. The simplest is via straight up claims and wars. If your brother had inherited the title, you will automatically have a claim to said title passed from your father, and you may press it. Make sure you've got plenty of levies. Check your holdings for vassals that are not really producing much gold. It can be very valuable to modify their feudal contract to produce more levy. For vassals, revocation might be an option. They're likely to object, so having a hook may be necessary to avoid going to war. Remember, these acts will incur tyranny as well, so choose your perks accordingly, as you may need to keep other vassals in line through fear. Intrigue will also be very powerful here, as you'll be able to abduct and fabricate hooks on your targets. Your siblings also may not yet have heirs, so finding a way to get rid of them is also an option. In conclusion, although the partition succession laws can be very frustrating, CK3 is, as always, about the story. It constantly throws unique problems at you, and the fun is in the solution, and of course the overall narrative it creates. With that, and of course a few of my tips, you should feel much more in control of your next playthrough. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown, as my goal is always to provide as high of quality content as I am able whilst being succinct. So make sure to check out my other guides and mechanic breakdowns. I also have a very cool video where I managed to go from a count to a duke and then to an emperor in just 18 in-game years. I highly recommend it, so please check that one out if you have the chance. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next one.